As Kelly pointed out, the U.S. is giving Ukraine $1 billion in aid. You can see what they're giving: 800 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, 2,000 Javelin anti-tank missiles, 100 tactical unmanned aerial systems, otherwise known as kamikaze drones, and then a huge amount of ammunition. With that, we bring in National Security Institute founder, executive director Jamil Jaffer. Hey, good to see you, my friend. Thank you. There's this whole idea about what Putin is going to find provocative and the like. Does Vladimir Putin really make a distinction between Javelin missiles that are going to take out his tanks and airplanes?
Well, look, he's told us that he sees our sanctions alone as an act of war. So he's already suggested that we've done enough for him to consider us at war with him. So adding more onto that, all these weapons that we're providing, at the 11th hour is great. It's good that we're doing this. It's important. We should continue to do it. But it's not nearly enough. If we really wanted to stave off and deter Putin, we would have provided these weapons well ahead of time and made it clear that he was going to lose a significant amount of Russian soldiers. Now he's in there. Now he's committed. Now it's on us to take the initiative back and simply supplying minimal levels of even large amounts, but minimal levels ultimately of support, not providing the MiG-29s, not establishing the no-fly zone that President Zelensky wants, is hugely problematic and will not result in the short term in terminating the killing of civilians, nor will it bring a peaceful resolution to this conflict anytime soon, Leland.
Reasonable people can disagree on a no-fly zone, but the simple fact of having force-on-force U.S. versus Russian fighter jets in conflict over Ukraine has some pretty significant possible escalations. I think, Marnie, you and I have talked about this. One of the real questions is, what do the Ukrainians actually need, and what can be given to them so that they can inflict enough damage on the Russians to change Putin's calculus?
Right. The question is, what makes the difference? Jamil, these drones, these killer drones, is that the game changer?
Well, Marnie, I think they certainly help. No doubt the Javelin missiles will help, the Stinger missiles will help, and these drones will help. But look, if the goal was to deter Putin's action, we're too late for that, right? He's already doubled down on killing civilians. What you guys described happening in Mariupol. It's not just that. It's schools. It's hospitals. It's nearly 2,000 civilians, identified by the UN, and certainly a lot more already either killed or injured in this conflict, and more to come. I mean, Vladimir Putin has lost credibility at home. He's losing credibility abroad. That's an important thing to him. He's going to have to get some wins on the board, and those wins are going to come at the expense of innocent civilians in Ukraine. We have got to stop the bleeding if we're going to force Vladimir Putin to the table and get a deal done and get him out of that country. And just waiting by and providing weapons alone is not going to do it, unfortunately, in my view, in this conflict.
Jamil, though, you talk about get a deal done. Vladimir Putin makes a habit of breaking deals. So it's hard to imagine how this turns into some kind of, immediate ceasefire and then Putin withdraws on and on and on. At some point, this is the Ukrainians' war to fight. Like it or not, this is their country. Why not just give them enough weapons? And we can argue back and forth whether MiG-29s make a difference. But with a couple thousand Javelins and 20 million rounds of ammunition, they can put an awful lot of hurt on a Russian army that is stalled, floundering, out of food, low morale.
Well, look, it's certainly true they could put a lot of hurt on that army. The challenge, of course, is we've seen what happens when major nations show weakness to another major nation, right? We've seen when you sort of give in. We gave Vladimir Putin Crimea. We didn't do anything about it. Now he's back to take more, right? We thought maybe he'll take the eastern provinces. He's going all the way to Kyiv. Do we really think Vladimir Putin is going to stop here, or he's going to respect the rule of law or the power of the U.S. forces?
Right. So, again, you keep saying, so we get a deal from Vladimir Putin, and then you're saying, why is he going to respect the rule of law? The only way he respects the rule of law is through force. And if you give the Ukrainians enough force to make it so he has to respect the Ukrainians and the rest of Europe, why isn't that the surefire way to fend off the bully?
Yeah, well, look, that's a great point, Leland. I think the answer is even with a tremendous amount of weaponry, the Ukrainians ultimately cannot hold off Vladimir Putin. Yes, it's true. The Russians are stalled right now. They're facing challenges. There's a lot of logistical issues. But at the end of the day, the Russians can outweight this. They have enough forces. Vladimir Putin can commit more forces to this fight. At the end of the day, on a one-on-one battle, even with weapons from us, they don't win this. At most, they fight to a stalemate, and tons of civilians lose their lives. That's not an outcome we want to see. And it's not an outcome that's going to stop Vladimir Putin from the next thing, the next action, whether it's in Ukraine or elsewhere. We've got to meet him force on force. And that doesn't mean we have to actually engage in warfare, but he has to know we have that credible threat of the use of the military, and we have taken that off the table, taking ourselves and the European powers out of the game.
Well, I think the question, Jamil, to ask is, when it comes to Putin, he wants to win, but is he more afraid of what happens if he loses?
No, absolutely. That is a huge problem. He's worried about losing face at home, losing support at home. He's already seeing a weakening of his support among the oligarchs. We saw him go after his own intelligence leaders just a few days ago with some arrests in Russia. So we know he feels vulnerable. But what does a person like Vladimir Putin do when he feels vulnerable? He lashes out. He makes himself look powerful. He does that at the expense of civilians in Ukraine. And unless we're willing to put real power on the table up against him, he's going to continue to move that ball down the road and continue to try to get points on the board. And those points are not points we want to see scored. Those are civilian lives. Those are schools, hospitals, dead children. It's the video that President Zelensky showed us today. That's going to get worse and worse by the minute if we don't get engaged sooner rather than later. By the way, it's not like we haven't seen this show before. We saw what happens when you give concessions to brutal dictators. We saw it in World War II. And again, the parallels aren't perfect. Hitler didn't have nuclear weapons, but we've learned this lesson before. We need to remember history if we're not going to be doomed to repeat it.
And remember Syria when chemical weapons were used, which is another threat on the table.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Jamil, thank you very much. Great conversation.